Listen Stokely, where we try to be involved, to listen and learn for us all to evolve. So welcome to you and welcome the world. We hope you enjoy the stories to be told.
Welcome to Stokely, a podcast where we explore environmental conservation, our human mindset and adventure. Each week we invite you into conversation with people from all walks of life, people who truly inspire us and set about contributing to a greater place for us all to call home. So please take some time to settle in for a conversation today with our host, Maya.
Welcome to the Stokely Podcast. My name's Mael Backhausen, and we are on a mission to maintain the art of conversation, holding space to converse and share stories on adventure, mindset, and our natural world. I really hope you're as motivated and inspired coming out of these conversations as I am, and I hope it leads you to start, sit, or listen in conversation. On this episode, I have the great pleasure to speak with none other than Bob Brown, the former leader of the Australian Greens and co-founder of the world's first Greens political party. Bob has been forever courageous in the political world and public opinion, standing up for issues of social, cultural, and environmental injustice. After more than a quarter century in Parliament, Bob retired to establish the Bob Brown Foundation, who leads Action for Earth, protecting ecosystems, species, wild and scenic heritage, and along the way, inspiring many others to do the same. Before we get into the conversation, we'd like to invite you in joining us to acknowledge the traditional custodians upon the lands where this podcast is created and listened to, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Thank you also for your time today. Now let's get into it. Bob, it's amazing. First, thanks so much, for taking some time this evening.
Thank you for asking me. What are you doing?
Well, I started this podcast a while ago, and it really was based off this thought that, quite a long time ago, people used to communicate with writing letters, and that form of communication, that art of communication, has kind of since been lost in many ways,
Yeah.
And it was just this thought that occurred to me that, wow, are we going so digitally that soon we're not going to have conversations to communicate to each other, and lose that form of, or that art of communication, that form of communication. And I guess, how do you try to encourage people to have a conversation? Well, just try and set an example and have conversations yourself. So this podcast was born out of that thought and that desire to kind of share conversations as a way to either start new conversations or just to be an example to
Yeah, that's great. Our one problem is, of course, we can't be talking with the folk who are going to be listening to this, but apologies at the outset.
Yeah.
We'll get your thought waves.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And
that's
absorb
it.
them as we go.
That's it. And, it's quite amazing when you bump into someone, and I'm sure you've experienced it a lot. You bump into people on the street you've never met, but they read something that you wrote, or they've listened to something you spoke about.
Yeah. And these days, it's nearly always a happy meeting up with people I don't know. It's so different to 30 or 40 years ago, where it was always the other way around. Go up the street on your own, at your own risk.
Wow.
And it's great. The world, I haven't changed in terms of thinking about the environment, but the world has. And there's something in the air that I haven't experienced since the 1960s, when there was the big revolution in the way, at least Western society thought, although capitalism came back and overrode it and found ways of dealing with it and taking the environment and the rights of people not to be in poverty and a whole range of other things back off the agenda. But I think they're in for a beating. And I was just talking with a couple of friends who are over here for the Voices, Festival of the Voices, about the capitalism itself, which is which is our predominant culture. And the interesting thing about it is it's self-ending, and we're at the end game, and it's got nowhere to go and has no alternative. We have alternatives for it, but the people driving it have no alternative but to keep exploiting the planet, making more money, growth, in doing it. And it just can't happen. So in some ways, we're in a winning situation, but there are very dangerous technologies abroad to try and stop people from being able to think about that and to think for themselves by people who want to keep the power and keep things going as they have been.
Yeah. And in saying that, is how do we make that step to getting to that sooner rather than later?
Well, you and I are environmentalists, and so that's part of it, is trying to keep the natural fabric of, or the biosphere of this beautiful little planet of ours, which so far as we know is the only one in the universe that has life and love and laughter as we know it. There probably are others out there, but we don't know about them yet. We will if we keep going long enough. But that living biosphere is being destroyed in our own lifetimes, and I've watched it unfolding through my 76 years of life. So we've got this climate emergency, we've got the extinction crisis, we have the growing gap between rich and poor. COVID's just nature throwing a bit of a warning shot across the bows of humanity, but here we are using 170% of the Earth's living resources already, nearly 2 planets worth, which is why we wake up every morning with less forests, less arable land, less fisheries, less almost everything but more mouths to feed. And there's no real global governance to deal with that. Mind you, we know from voting patterns in democracies like ours that there's no real appetite by people for it either. I mean, the brain is closed down. So at the last federal election, 90% of Australians voted for more coal mines, more gas fracking, more logging of forests, more and bigger fisheries, even knowing that that's going to kill the barrier reef. It's going to dry out the Murray-Darling Basin, our great food bowl. It's going to send a lot more creatures to extinction, and so on. So the answer to this, well, there's 2 things. First of all, that's unsustainable. It will come to a very bad end, and some scientists are predicting a global population of 1 billion at the end of this century if we're lucky. And you only have to extrapolate and think about that and all the cruelty and suffering that'll occur in the meantime.
Yeah.
And coming to grips with the fact that there is enough if we change, but we have to change our culture. We have to change from this capitalist exploit the planet thinking, and that's where our Indigenous friends, there's 350 million of them on the planet, are the trailblazers because they're so ancient. It's a contradictory thing, but this relating to the planet and to each other in a sharing fashion, and community. Maggie Thatcher, the British Prime Minister, Conservative Prime Minister, way back said that there's no such thing as society. Well, I think there's no such thing as the individual. I think we are all society or community, and we're nothing without it. And we're a global community now. We're no longer just the little valley or the state or the nation. We're a global society, and we've got to work together, and we can. But the omens are not good. However, there's nothing better in life than to be turning the odds in favour of a well-thought-out readjustment of global culture, rather than just feeling depressed about it and thinking, I want to end all this. I thought about that when I was young, and I'm glad I didn't make that mistake.
You do have that, you often say, don't get depressed, get active, which is a really powerful thing to hear when you do take a look at what's happening in the world today. Do you think that, unfortunately, a lot of people are going to have to get into the depth of facing this and being incredibly depressed and moved on that level to then get active? Or do you think
No,
it
I
can
think
be
that's
bypassed?
look. I think we've moved into that. I hardly a day passes when I don't have somebody come up to me and say I'm depressed, and then talk about what's happening on the planet. Or the reverse is they say, I don't understand it. Why are you still optimistic? Why aren't you depressed? And when I speak at schools, that's a very common question. Why aren't you depressed? Because it's common sense to be depressed. You look at what's happening, what we human beings are doing to each other and to the planet, and why wouldn't you feel this is all too bad? But the reverse, as you say, is the antidote to that is to get active, because we don't know what the future's bringing. We can either leave it to a pretty destructive path that you can extrapolate from where we are at the moment, or we can change it. And Margaret Mead, the anthropologist, said way back, don't worry that a small group of people can't change the world. Nothing ever else did. And now the Americans, being who they are, have done studies on this, and they, universities, and you can take this with as many grains of salt as you want, say that actually it's 3.5% of people driving a change that will make it happen, like with the suffragettes. It was a very small number of women who changed the world in terms of equality of right to vote. And of course there's a lot more occurring in that area. Same with getting children out of coal mines, making the Industrial Revolution, turning children into slaves, really. Well, slavery's another one. Largely gone west, still a lot of it, but not like it was, and it's outlawed. The global view is that we should never do that again. Now, those things didn't just happen because of the passage of time. They happened because people saw that the change was needed and were prepared to risk their lives, and a lot of them lost their lives in the process. And many of those people didn't see the outcome that they wanted to see in their lifetimes, but the outcome came because the time was right. And the time is right now for the whole planet Earth to become a global human community with respect for all the other species on the planet, and to live with it instead of off it. And that seems an impossible dream at the moment. But so for the suffragettes, who were spat on by other women and had the Bible quoted at them and had the House of Lords thundering that you couldn't run an economy if women had a say. It seems laughable now, but that was the reality of the times, and women went to jail and went on strike and had their stomachs pumped or food forced down into their stomachs and so on. And worse things, at the moment there's 200 to 300 environmentalists being murdered a year around the planet, where we are not in clover by any means, and that's because people want to make money out of exploiting their environments. A lot of those are, 2/3 I think, are Indigenous people. But the logic is with those of us who want to see a new settlement, a new peace in our own minds about going forward using common sense. And for the Australians, it does mean pulling in our belt. We're the richest per capita people on the planet. Well, that's measured in dollars terms, but richness in terms of spirit and creativity and so on is something different. Aboriginal people know that. We don't, but we've got to learn it. And a lot of pleasure can come from it. But that's a revolution in the whole way the capitalist world and materialism has the world by the throat. It is the great religion of the age.
Yeah.
Curious thing about that, of course, is that the great central tenet of most of the great old religions was the golden rule: do unto others as you would have done unto yourself. or have them do unto yourself. That's totally missing from capitalism. That cannot, that's gone. It's out the window. We need it back.
Yeah. It's amazing to hear you say, Australia, as an example, has lost that element of creativity and spirit within, I guess, the society in many ways. Yet the people that were here for tens of thousands of years before settlement had that in abundance. Have you, over the times since you've been heavily into protecting this blue sphere that we all live on, like, what's the change you've seen in adopting more of that spirituality and that creativity? Have you seen it in positive ways and also negative?
Yes, I have. There is no doubt that we have to keep our feet on the ground and be resilient. There isn't going to be a spiritual being that comes out of the ether and saves us. There will be no divine intervention. We either do this or we lose it. We lose ourselves. That's not to say that we shouldn't be spiritual beings, because we are. That's our relationship as part of the universe, which evolved from a big bang, we're told, 13.8 billion years ago, is such that we were always enfolded in, we were a possibility right at the outset, because here we are. That's just logical. And we are spiritual beings. When we relate to each other, there's an essence in that, like me talking with you at the moment and listening to the gentle voices from the back room here where people are learning about non-violent action. It's a sphere which is very different to just talking to and fro. And being on the planet and experiencing its natural beauty is an incredible spiritual dimension. For example, we don't give our loved ones plastic flowers and say, I love you. We give them real ones. That's the simplest example of how we have a spiritual relationship with the living planet. And whatever, you could write a book about it, but it distills down to that. We don't put, by and large, we might in a passing phase, but we don't put pictures of bulldozers and chainsaws on our bedroom walls. We put up pictures of nature and beautiful things that make us feel good. And that is essential to happiness in human life. It's just the way it is, feeling good about sharing things with other people and feeling good about being alive on the planet. And just going back to your earlier comment, I find there's always been unhappiness in the world and things that have been disastrous and cruel and extraordinary. But in Australia, in my lifetime, I haven't run in till latter years this phenomenon of so many people coming up and saying, I feel hopeless, I feel depressed, this is all too bad, I don't know why you're still optimistic. And that's a spiritual thing too. That's a readout in people's minds about how the world's going. If people didn't worry about that when they were part of nature, they do worry about it when we're now just exploiting nature for the profit line to get more goods for ourselves. And the trick is getting off that. In the meantime, being involved in protecting the planet, and that involvement of protecting what's left of the natural planet is rapidly escalating, and it is going to lead to much greater rebellion. And, we saw in the last week 2 young women in the United States jail for 8 years for getting out an oxy welder or whatever and puncturing holes in pipelines that, despite the Native Americans and a lot of other supporters opposing, have gone ahead. And I get asked every now and then, criticised. You're wrong. We have to take them on. And this is the espousal of violence. But the state has the guns, it's got the tanks, it's got the police forces, and so on. And non-violence does work, a la Martin Luther King and Gandhi and right back to Christ and other people in history. It's an extraordinarily powerful force, and if we have to resolve this with violence, there's such massive weaponry at the hand of those who have power at the moment. We are asking to have the worst outcome. Well, we want the best outcome. And that's the prevalence of common sense. All those people who come up and say, I'm depressed, they've got common sense. They know. They want the world to go well. They're not nasty people. They're loving people. That's the problem. And we need the loving people to be in control. It's about empathy. And too many of our leaders don't empathise with other fellow citizens, particularly if they have a different point of view or come from a different cultural background. And they don't have empathy with the living planet. They have no trouble sending whaling ships out or logging forests because they don't empathise with it. And the curious thing about that is that if I ever get to talk with who did devise the universe, I'll take her on or him on and say, well, why did you do this? The ladder of power is such that people without empathy get up to the top easiest because they have no trouble kicking other people in the face and treading on their fingers, whereas sensitive, well thought out people will fall off the ladder because they're not combative in that sense. And this is a reality that we just have to deal with. And it's a contradictory situation that good-hearted, loving, caring, empathetic people have got to take over. And it's not their bent. And we came so close to at least a democratic disaster with Donald Trump, who's lacking in empathy. And the people who stormed the Capitol largely lacking in empathy. But, there was enough goodwill, and including a woman who spent a lot of the last years going around Georgia getting black voters to enrol. She had foresight in a way to escape that disaster. It doesn't mean that we are going to escape disaster, but it does mean people doing good things can change the outcome.
Yeah, and you're an example of that, and so many people that come into contact with the foundation examples of that. How do you do anything on a daily practice, Bob, that helps you stay grounded and stay empathetical? And
well, no, I don't. Except I do like to go for a walk. I've been for a walk on the hill near Randalls Bay at home up there, Sugarloaf Walk today with friends.
It's so funny, Bob, because me and another mate, we actually ran up Sugarloaf this morning.
Was that you? I heard there were two people who ran through.
Yeah.
So, because there were some workers there on the track. And
I was just chatting to Paul, and Paul said, I was like, oh, Paul, we were out at Sugarloaf this morning, me and my friend Samwise Gamgee Martin, and we were up there, we just went around, and he said, I think Bob's place is down there somewhere. I was like, oh, wow. So we must have just missed you guys.
Well, we came a bit later, but there you go. And you see, Paul's been the driving force for putting that track around there, and you think in some ways, it would be better left alone. But no, it isn't. And there's thousands of people, since it was opened in 2018, go around that track and love it. And the rest of the place is fine. It's being looked after, it's better than it was.
Yeah.
And it's a very good example of the fact that the planet can withstand us loving it with our impact, but it can't withstand us just taking it because we think we can make a short-term profit out of it. But just going back to your question, I as a young fellow did spend quite a long while depressed about the world, and it's an empirical choice to stop doing that and to become what is possibly part of the answer, which is quite fulfilling. And very important to this is looking after yourself. People get very driven and obsessed with, we've got to change things now. I was down at Hobart Town Hall in Ronald Reagan when he was President of the United States, and the most decorated soldier, American Marine from Vietnam, grabbed me by the lapels, Colonel David Hackworth, and said, "Bob, you've got to stop." We had a meeting on Forest. "You've got to stop this. Ronald Reagan, the president, is dangerous. He's likely to blow up the world. You've got to get involved in nuclear weapons." Well, I have been most of my life, but I just said to him then, "David, if that's the case, I'm going home to read a book." And I always say to folk, you go and finish your studies. If you want to go to a party, you go to a party. If you are really having a hard time of it and want to do a bit of shopping, well, you go and do your shopping or plan your trip or holiday. We can't hair-shirt ourselves. And we can't also change society by rebelling against it to the point of accusing everybody in capitalist society of being, capitalist whatevers, and saying you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. You can change quite a lot our own lifestyle to make things better, but the better change is to be part of the movement, which is to protect the planetary environment and bring in a new philosophy of how we share life on this planet so that we live with it instead of off it. And that's going to make us potentially materially poorer, but it's going to make us spiritually and in terms of happiness much, much richer. Because security is essential to happiness, and security is knowing that the planet's going to go forward with human beings still able to talk with each other and care about it. And at the moment that's being taken from us. I just feel good being alive, though. I love human beings. I see all the shortcomings. We've got native wild animals around the house, and we do our best to look after them because they're little enclosed woodlands where we live, and they can't stray much beyond it, but there's quolls and golden possums and bandicoots and birds. I'm not one of those who's even strict about that. I mean, just before I came up here today, I had a thrush land on my arm and take a tiny piece of cheese, which it gets in winter. Summer it doesn't come, it doesn't want it. And I'm not one of those who's rigorously saying you shouldn't feed animals because it's bad for them. Well, I don't know. The ones around our place are doing quite well because we're helping them just a bit. Yeah. And enormous pleasure for us and for visitors seeing that. I like human culture. I love reading good things, although I'm not as strong on fiction as maybe I could be. Great poetry, great music, and I think that's part of the future. The solution for humanity is to, in future, bring out the creative best in every human being. Let her or him find what it is that they want to be creative about and value it. Not for how much productivity you can get out of converting the natural commons into some other goods, but how much creativity you can put into either entertaining yourself or making other people feel uplifted through art, through music, through sports. These things don't smash the planet. They don't have to smash the planet, and we're very good at it. We just have to make them more important than the spending $65 billion on the next round of nuclear or in our case, diesel-driven submarines.
Bob, how have you enjoyed welcoming trail runners into your world through the Takina Trail, which was previously known as the Takina Ultra? But The Takina Trail is an event that's obviously been on for a few years now, and I guess it's a whole different group of people that you've welcomed into the forest and into the space of activism. We like to call it sports activism. How have you found that?
Well, I've really enjoyed it. As an environmentalist, you're always thinking, oh, what's a herd of people tramping through here or up there or down there going to do? But I'm way beyond that. And I'll let you into a secret. I'm looking forward to the Olympics. And I'm a bit of an athletics tragic. And maybe that's because, except for the Dorrigo gift 100 yards for under 14s back in 1950 something. I never won anything, but I've still got that cup about 3 inches high on my sideboard. But I enjoy sports. I enjoy the physical, the wonder of the physical ability of human beings. So matching that with saving a place is just a brilliant outcome as far as I'm concerned. So we did walk this year for the Takina Ultra down that track that you and others devised, sometimes, and some poor competitor running the other way ran the wrong side of the mud hole in front of us and fell in and went up to the shoulders. but it's terrific. Then there's huge contribution in monetary terms coming out of that to protect the very place those folk are running through. There's a clue in that. There's people that you wouldn't necessarily think are environmentalists, and maybe they're not all devoted environmentalists, they've all got other occupations. Why would you run through 20 or 30 or 40 or 50, 60 kilometres of wild country when you can do it round and round in a stadium? Well, it's hard to explain that, but it's a bit like the plastics flowers analogy. There's something beautiful about running free on the planet that all our forebears have run free on. And so I think it's terrific, and I'd like to see other components of the best of human culture besides sports. Wouldn't it be great to have a concert or two in the Tarkine forest? You'd have to be ready for the wet weather and the cold out there. But I was approached about the Tarkine running event at a meeting I was at in Sydney, and asked if that would be a good thing. It could be a fundraiser, and instantly was amazed that there are people who've got expertise in doing this. And look, it's happened.
It's happened.
Yeah. And it's successful. And you see people who are absolutely at the end of their physical endurance. They've really driven themselves into a zone that's not really physically very pleasant. But everybody ends up smiling and happy. Yeah. That's a pretty good sign. That It's a good thing.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? I still even get a kick out of feeling absolutely horrible through the sport of running, yet knowing that moments away I'm going to also feel a great amount of joy in reflecting on that, and just through the nature of change, I might even still be running in that same moment, and then feel all of a sudden amazing. And
I guess it's a concentrated form of bushwalking, because I've had some terrible times bushwalking, and the earlier on, the worse it was.
Yeah.
And think, you had 1 week out on a 3-week trip into the southwest wilderness of Tasmania, and the pack's worn a little hole in your back, and your feet, and you think, how did I get myself into this? Yeah. But it's it's just been a wonderful part of my life, and I wish a lot more people could enjoy it. And just seeing runners repeatedly putting themselves into a position of pretty hard going, but enjoying it. I guess it's, what about Beethoven and any modern composer? they put themselves through hell. Writers of novels do it. Any great pursuit, taking to the pinnacle of human ability to express it or carry it through, is going to have some trials and tribulations along the way.
I feel like it comes back to that creativity in a way, that if you can find that avenue and medium which you are creative, it can give you an energy and an amount of endurance that you just can't really explain,
And doing it with or for other people is that other dimension, because we are communal creatures, and so in a way it's you're testing yourself out as an individual, but at the same time you're part of a community, and if that wasn't there, it wouldn't be nearly so much fun and nearly so enjoyable. It's a curious part of our makeup.
Have you got a bit of an adventure story? When have you been at the end of your physical tether? Have you got a mission you were on that sticks in your mind?
Oh, well, many. When you've been around as long as me, but I often think of talking about the two women who've just been locked up for 8 years jail. I've escaped that, but I was down in the East Picton blockade. Those forests are now only recently protected. There was a lot of damage occurred in the meantime over the lower or southern Picton Bridge, and had told we had some dangerous people, pro-logging vigilantes down there coming, and we had been tipped off they were coming that night. And I tell everybody, if you get a tip over the phone usually from a woman who back then who is related to one of the people running the show, but take notice. Anyway, they said they're coming to teach us a lesson. Anyway, as dark came on, we had a bus blockading a road up further. We heard that actually being blown up. And I said to the couple I'm with, run back into the forest and keep running, right back to camp, because these folk are very often cowardly and won't go through in a dark place at night. But anyway, I then didn't take my own instructions. Down the road comes the car, and I ran across the other side of the bridge and got into some cutting grass, a big knob of cutting grass. And they came across the bridge with guns out of the car, and there was a dog, not howling but simpering. It was a hunting dog, obviously. And I heard one of them say, "Oh, there's nothing here." And they had a searchlight, and they shone it right through this grass. Now, if they'd have found me there, I was finished. They drove back across the bridge, and I heard them yell out, "Look what we've got here." And my heart sank, because I thought the young couple that I told to run hadn't kept running. But what they'd done was found the 3 cars hidden in the rainforest, and they proceeded to dispatch those with gelignite and shotguns, and the 3 cars were burnt to a cinder, and there was a hole in the canopy of the forest there for a long time, and then they drove off. The outcome of that was for the Minister for Police, who I knew at the time, to say, "Oh, it was the Wilderness Society blockade down there, just getting self-publicity." And we had a fair idea who those folk were. They were never arraigned, but they were pretty murderous on that night. And that was, you can call that an adventure if you like, but it took me a little bit into the realm of some of the people who have died in the Amazon, for example, or in Central America, where just this week a court has found people who burst into the home of a woman called Berta and shot her in front of her family because she was opposing a big dam which was going to flood their valley. They found the part of the dam consultants guilty of this. It was a very rare case. But you just got to think of the terrible circumstance, much worse circumstances people have elsewhere, and shake your head about that. When it comes to the other sort of adventure, the pleasant sort of adventure, I've been up Federation Peak twice in the 70s, and both times had to wait till my knees stopped knocking from fear of looking down there at Lake Jeeves. But the pleasure of getting to the top was great. That's the, I suppose, about at the end of adventure in terms of my younger life, yeah.
That's some pretty aggressive terrain, to put it lightly, up there.
Yes, and getting to it is quite a struggle. And the first time for me was to walk along the South Coast track from east to west, from Cockle Creek through to Melaleuca, and old Denny King was there, and this is end of 1972, start of 73, because we were there on New Year's Day. It was the only fine day on this trip of 19 days out.
Wow.
And he got us to dig. Oh, Denny was wonderful. He had a Tasmanian accent. It's gone, you know. Bob, we'll have another hole over here, he said, and we dig another hole because he was tin mining out there. But he took us in his boat up to the old river at the eastern end of Bathurst Harbour, and we got off there and walked up to Federation Peak from the west.
Wow.
And there'd been a fire through a bit of it was raining, mind you, but so we had a fairly easy go of it until we got onto the slopes of Jeeves Bluff, which is on the western side of Federation Peak, and the scrub in there was quite thick, even though there'd been others through before, and no doubt have been since. And then waited for 3 days up at Hanging Lake and just got 4 hours or so relief. Got up onto the top, came back down again. Next morning, left in horizontal hail, and that was the 8th of January.
Wow.
So it was one of those summers that, and then we walked around to the Western Arthurs. So,
yeah. Oh, jeez.
At this stage, at the outset, that was my first big bushwalk, and you know, when we came through Hobart on Boxing Day 1972, Wellington was like a wedding cake. It had snow right down. It had snow flurries into the higher suburbs.
Wow.
On Christmas Eve and Christmas. So it was a continuum of pretty wild weather. And we went to but I don't know, something clicked and I got going, and my companions, who are much more practiced walkers than me from the northwest of Tasmania, said, no, we should come back down off the Western Arthurs. This weather's too crook.
Yeah.
And just as well they did, because it kept raining for the next 3 weeks.
Have you been many other places in Australia where you've felt such a, I guess, either an emotional connection or emotional impact like you've described you felt in Tasmania?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, just walking in the ranges of Central Australia, I see there's a music festival coming up out there at...
Is it Birdsville?
At
Birdsville?
No, this is west of Alice Springs,
Okay.
in one of those dramatic gorges there, and having, you know, it's phenomenal. But of course, through all of this, as in the southwest, the Aboriginal presence is never out of my mind. And you go to some places and feel really good about them, and you go to other places and don't feel so good. And I understand in a basic sort of way why Aboriginal people say that's bad country, this is good country. And I was just talking with Shane Howard about going out into Central Australia, where he helped clear down a rock, a spotted rock that had very great Aboriginal significance with an Aboriginal, of course, an Aboriginal host. And there's a groove there where men have been wearing a groove in a rock for thousands of years. And the man he was with lamenting that the young people are all being diverted away now to metallic devices, you know, all the things we've got, and why wouldn't they? But there's the rub in doing so. We're losing contact with a relation, and that man shed tears, with the relationship with the land that human beings have always had. We've just lost it in the last few generations, and it's threatening us with being left without a spiritual compass, and therefore getting towards the end of the existence of ourselves on this planet. I went up to the Daintree and walked through there before the road went through with a couple of kids whose parents had been swung around on bulldozers, and you know, I was just thinking today about the Daintree. It was threatened with mining, with logging, with real estate cut up, and in 1987, Bob Hawke, aided by Graham Richardson, who was then the Minister for the Environment, went up there. There was a riot in the local town, Ravenshoe. People were worried that he was going to be killed. There was such violence stirred up against greenies. However, Hawke went to the 87 election saying, I'm going to protect this and make it World Heritage, over the state government, Joe Jelke-Peterson's demand that the feds keep their head out of this, but he was working on the basis of the Franklin outcome and succeeded. And that is now, of course, a great job, an economic creator. And if you go back to Ravenshoe, there's people there just earning their livings out of the fact that people want to go to this tropical World Heritage area. The Tarkine's exactly the same. Now, here we are, it's mining, logging, off-road vehicles wanting to rush down the coast, mindless of the Aboriginal heritage, and a strong state or federal government could stop that tomorrow. And people say, oh, look, there's all too much happening, you can't stop this. Oh, yes, you can. But we've got to get to the people. The people have got to appeal and let governments know that they want them to act on behalf of the environment, and indeed the right of Aboriginal people to their land. And when that happens, the outcome is a sustainable one forever. So it's a good thing to be working on. And
it must be amazing to see so many people in the recent weeks putting themselves on the front line.
I love it, and them. It is pretty amazing. And I got out of the Senate to get back into environmental activism, because that's where my heart is with the planet. And to see so many young and old people, and very well thought out people, going and standing in the way of those machines, or sitting in the way of those machines, or locking onto those machines, oh, that's such a uplifting sign of hope for the future. And the company that's unnecessarily wanting to put millions of tonnes of waste over the coming years into that pristine rainforest, when they've got options on their own side of the river, is pretty hard-headed, you know. It's a Beijing-based company, 74% owned by the Chinese state authorities, and I've seen what their reception is for people who, for example, in Tibet want to save their environment. Well, you know, in jail and herded off the land and into. It's a very tough world. However, we're not in China. We are privileged to be in Australia, and there is a win-win outcome here. And the strength of this is for that company and our politicians to know we are not going away. That we're in here until they desist. And it's a cameo of how the world is. And seeing the folk, I was astonished when I went up there last week to learn that there's 15 people actually. Yes, we were about to, we got Paul coming in the door to say we've got to go to the next event, but 15 people out there, you know, running a huge operation, supported by public generosity, which is going to lead to that little patch of rainforest being protected, or a heck of a lot of us in jail. That's the way it is.
And it's a beautiful bit of rainforest out there.
Oh, it's extraordinary, and it's been made a forbidden forest by MMG, the mining company. You know, they wouldn't take the minister in there. They showed her where the dam site is. We're not allowed to go in there. We've written and said we want scientists in there to study the wildlife and so on. They said you can't. This is public land. So when we went in there for a day last week and wandered through that forest, and the fungi are still out, and listening to the black cockatoos and the thrushes and the birds in there, and just the splendour to the eye of that forest, which has been there now going on 65 million years in its various forms, is just great for the human spirit. And of course, for everyone who goes there, 1,000 more get the enjoyment. We're putting out lots of material. Our photographers are our strength, and of itself, it's not going to let go of us, and we're not going to let go of it.
Absolutely. It's a lot more beautiful than a bunch of plastic flowers, hey?
Totally. and it doesn't, I mean, there is no need for it. They can go, they've got 5 options at least. They can put their waste down into their disused mines. They can build up the current tailings dams they've got over there. They can go to other places and if they have to, store their waste on that side of the river. So we're on a win-win here. We'll win the forest, and they can have their waste if they must and put it somewhere else.
Absolutely.
Might cost them a bit more. Isn't that terrible?
It would be awful, yeah, if they had to reach into their pockets and spend a bit more on a more environmentally sensitive thing.
Yeah.
If they use their creativity, they might have already thought of that, but they might not have much left.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, thanks so much, mate. It's just an absolute pleasure to speak to you and to be able to hear some more about you as a person and the way you've been able to go about the amazing things you've done for this great planet.
Well, thanks. I'm just me, and it's great talking with you. And I get the greatest of pleasure out of seeing younger folk with a sparkle in their eye for this planet. It makes life at my end of the range very, very satisfying. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining in today, listening to the conversation I had with Bob Brown. A truly inspiring human with so many amazing things to say about life and our natural world. So, as I mentioned before, I really hope you feel motivated and inspired after leaving this conversation, and if nothing else, I really just hope it inspires some conversation in your life. So, one takeaway from this would be action for Earth. We've got a lot of things we can do on small and big scales, and the real thing is, if you do small things, all of us collectively, it's all going to add up, and we're going to have some great positive action for the wild and natural world that we need to live. So a big thank you to you, and I hope you keep well until next time. Thanks a lot.